This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Bobby Fenton.
A couple extra days to rest than we anticipated, and it'll be good for our guys, and we'll get some good work days in and prep work, and obviously, a team we're pretty familiar with, and so it's about just getting all our details in order and feeling good about ourselves and believing in one another and getting off to a great start.
Listen, we've played Florida numerous times. There is nothing that Paul doesn't know about us and I don't know about them. Maybe who's going to be in the lineup for them in game one. Other than that, there's no secrets. And so it's been really, it's the rep of the East. It's been the two of us for the last half a decade. So I think it's the way that the schedule sets up when the Battle of Florida happens. It can be must-watch TV, so it should be a lot of fun.
Hello, everybody. Bobby Fenton here. It's a pleasure for me to make my debut, not on the network, but on Power Lunch. And guy Dave Mishkin across from me here, someone I've known a long time, someone I've talked to a long time, have never actually done anything really on air together. So this is exciting. Dave, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. I think we did you had me in an interview setting.
Yeah,
because we've had you in the playoff shows.
Yeah, I've had you on the show before.
The rewind,
we've never
right?
Done something together. Yeah, the Lightning playoff rewind, which I've done a lot of the past few seasons, and that was phone interviews and stuff like that. But to sit across, virtually, of course, but to look you in the eye, get to do a whole show with you, it's a real honor for me. I've been listening to you for a long time, and we've been friends.
Thank you, Bobby.
So this is great to be with you today. And we've got, obviously, the Lightning and Panthers, like you heard John Cooper say, 5 years in a row now. One of them has come out of the East as the Stanley Cup final representative. And, of course, 4 of those 5 years, including this one, they have met. And so the first thing I want to ask you, before we go any further, what do you think of the NHL's playoff format? Do you like that it's happening like this? Do you like playing the same team? Do you believe in the whole promotes rivalries thing? Or do you wish there was a little more variety?
So there are certain things that probably get me, wouldn't even say riled up, but stir my drink a little bit. This is not really one of them. I just kind of take the attitude, you're going to have to beat good teams to get where you want to go. That's true for all 16 teams that have made the playoffs. It's going to be frustrating for the team that loses the series to go out in the first round knowing that you faced a powerhouse, let's be honest. I mean, both these teams are cup contenders, and having to see that opponent in the first round. We actually touched on this a little bit because we've had some fans griping about the playoff format. And the way they set it up, this is coming out of the 12-13 lockout into the next year. They redid the divisions. They went from 3 divisions to 2 divisions in each conference. They changed the playoff format, and it was, just as you said, to accentuate rivalries. So you were having division foes meeting more regularly in the playoffs, and the way you have them meet more regularly is to meet early in the playoffs. It's not really that way, because with a wild card, you could have a team flip from one division to the next. But what I said a couple of days ago was, yeah, exactly. Montreal's playing Washington. What I said a few days ago was, look, yeah, it's true that, for example, Edmonton and Los Angeles will now be playing 4 years in a row. And the Lightning and Panthers are playing for the 4th time in the last 5 years. And usually it's early. If not the first round, it's the second round. But the way that this is going to get rotated, yes, you could do 1 through 8. But also, if you have some non-playoff teams in past years getting into the playoffs, that's what the league wants. I mean, the league is set up to allow teams that are near the bottom of the standings to get better and improve. And, to the extent that Montreal has not been in the playoffs, other than the year that we had the 56-game season and they got to the Stanley Cup final, but really they've missed the playoffs more often than not. Like Montreal-Washington is not a series that we've seen. I think the last time they met was 2010, Bobby. So Ottawa hasn't been in the playoffs since 2017. They haven't played the Maple Leafs in a playoff series since 2004. So the current format can lend itself to having different series. If you're just saying it's not right that Dallas and Colorado, two powerhouse teams, are meeting in the first round, the Lightning and Panthers, two powerhouse teams, are meeting in the first round, okay. But, I mean, if you went with a different format, there's always little loopholes. I remember when it was the 3 division winners and then 4 through 8 were the basically wild card teams or just based on points.
Right.
People were saying, well, the weakest division winner is benefiting by playing the 6th seed, whereas the 4th place team has more points than the weakest division winner. And 4 shouldn't be having to play 5. 4 should be higher. There's always something, right? There's no perfect format. And so I just don't get too worked up about it. And look, you're going to have to go through the champs. That was true when the Lightning were the champs, and it's true now for the Panthers. Beating the champs is the path to becoming the champ. I believe that. And it's going to go through Florida this year. So, yes, it's possible the Lightning could lose in the first round, but I think that they are well equipped to beat this Florida team, maybe better equipped than they were last year.
Oh, and I agree. And I'm not worried about playing the Panthers any more than they're worried about playing us. I think it'll be a great series. I think from a fan standpoint, my issue with it, well, there's 2 issues. Like you said, there's the one where should you be playing, we don't even know who the toughest teams will be. All 8 of these teams, could go a long way for all we know. But do you want the toughest teams playing each other earlier or later in the playoffs? That's one issue. And the other one, and this is maybe where my ADHD flares up, is just the variety of it. I think it's ridiculous that the Kings and Oilers are playing again for the 4th year in a row. And if it just fell that way because it fell that way, it'd be one thing. But even knowing who you're going to play for so long, like how long have Carolina and New Jersey known they were going to play each other? I mean, it's been like 2 months where like that was locked in. So the regular season, you're just kind of spinning your wheels and you're okay. I think if you have the 1 through 8, then every game all the way up to game 82, you still don't know. I mean, even 1 point here and there could make a difference. Whereas this one kind of just waters down the final few weeks of the season. And so that's another place where I have an issue with it. And the other thing I think that, and you mentioned the divisions, and you mentioned how, yes, this is designed, I think, with the idea that it wouldn't be 9 years with Detroit not making the playoffs or Buffalo not even being anywhere near the playoffs. Right. It's not supposed to be the same 3 teams that are good every year. So when they are, then yes, you end up having these matchups over and over. And if it cycles through a little more, that's great. But I look at like divisions, for example. Just the idea of divisions. And I think about this in all sports because you mentioned when it was 3 divisions and 1 through 3 automatically. Divisions are random, right? Like it's just based on geography. Like it has nothing to do with anything. So if you happen to be geographically located in a place where other teams around you are better or worse, it has nothing to do with anything. It's just randomness. The ideal system for me, I know this is all just kind of a fantasy. I wouldn't even have divisions. I'd have an East and a West. I mean, even that, you need for scheduling purposes. I understand we can't have teams flying everywhere. I'd have 16 teams on one side, 16 on the other, balance the schedule, and then 1 through 8. And there's no divisions, there's no automatic seeds, there's no this or that. And then it really would be 1 versus 8 and 2 versus 7. And then I'd reseed every round, which is another thing. Always having the highest seed playing the lowest seed. And I don't have a problem playing the Panthers, like you said. You're gonna have to beat all these teams at some point. So whether you play them early or later is one thing. But that's my issue with it. Now, let me ask you this. Did you think it was important going down the stretch? You want to hang a banner at the top of the arena. That part's cool. But did you think it was important if the Lightning could have finished first in the Atlantic and gotten what may have been, quote unquote, an easier draw? I don't think Ottawa's any bargain, but to avoid having to play possibly Toronto and Florida and instead getting to play Toronto or Florida in back-to-back series? Did you think that was a big deal?
Yeah, so this was a topic that Greg and I kicked around probably in the last 6 weeks when it became clear the Lightning had moved out of that wild card muck with their winning streak, and they were pretty well ensconced in the top 3, and they had a path to first place. And I kind of have always felt that you get who you get, and it's going to be a tough matchup, understanding that, yes, certain matchups may be a little bit more favorable, but if you don't play well, you don't execute well, I don't care about the matchup. You're not going to win. And if you play at a really high level, you can beat any team. I believe the Lightning can beat any of the teams that are also in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
Assuming they play at a very high level and keep their standard very high, which is really the variable here. And what the other team is doing too. How well is the other team executing? So Greg kind of swayed me a little bit, actually, because, we have an hour to talk about this 5 days a week. And it seemed like there was some logic to finishing first, not for the banner, but to avoiding a first-round matchup with Toronto or Florida, the two teams that have knocked the Lightning out in the first round the last 2 years. And I actually asked some of the players about it. And what I heard was an emphasis on finishing no lower than second and getting home ice. That seemed to be more important than the opponent. And why is that? Well, the Lightning did have a much better home record this year than road record. Again, I'm not sure how much we can read into that because, you're a numbers guy, Bobby. You can go back and look through the years. There have been
in this series,
a number of regular
yeah.
and there have been a lot of regular seasons where the Lightning, let's just say, have had a really, really good home record and a less impressive road record, and their playoff road record has been better than their home record. So some of that goes out the window in a playoff series. You're not at a disadvantage in travel to the extent that you might be in a regular season where you're on a 4-game road trip, you're playing a back-to-back, the team that's at home is waiting for you. They've been home for a few days. Here, both teams are on equal footing. Paul Maurice of the Panthers did say in the Stanley Cup final he felt it was an advantage for Florida that Edmonton had to make the first long trip. Fair enough. This is different. This is a 35-minute flight.
Yeah.
The Panthers are not going to be worn down by having to come to Tampa for the first 2 games. Okay. So the players felt that getting home ice was important. John Cooper has said, and he's been very consistent in this regard, that home ice is especially an advantage when you get to Game 7. He's not sure it's as much of an advantage prior to that, but he's like, if you give me my choice, I would take home ice to get Game 7 at home.
Oh, of course.
So the Lightning did that. They got second place, and if we just believe what they were saying, and it wasn't just one player, it was a handful of players, they were all pretty consistent about making the delineation, let's make sure that we get home ice in the first round, not, boy, we really need to finish first so we don't see Toronto or Florida in the first round. So I'll take them at their word. And as you said, Ottawa's no pushover. This is going to be, that Ottawa-Toronto series is going to be a supercharged series because while Toronto will likely win the series just based on their position in the standings, their playoff pedigree, and by pedigree I just mean experience. I know they haven't had a lot of success, but up and down the roster, the Toronto Maple Leafs roster has a lot more playoff experience than the Ottawa Senators roster. But I think there are 2 things at play here that work against Toronto. First of all, this is a white-hot rivalry. I know one team has been good and the other team hasn't been. There is a history there. They do not like each other. The Senators and their fans do not like the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's not Toronto playing Carolina in the first round, right? Like this is
right.
a very charged, yes, there is that element, charged rivalry. And the second part is all of the pressure is on Toronto. Ottawa's coming into this series with house money. And it's just the history of the Maple Leafs in this in the Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Nylander era, right? Where they've had playoff disappointment after playoff disappointment. Here they come in. They are expected to just wipe up the floor with the Senators. And what if it doesn't start unfolding that way? One team has a lot more pressure than the other. Does that mean that Ottawa is going to win the series? No, but I do think that those are elements at play here. So finishing first for Toronto comes with it this very interesting first-round matchup. It's different than pick another series. I mean, Washington and Montreal, that's just a different feel, right? Washington has different questions to answer. Like, was their regular season just they got rolling, and now that we're in the playoffs, the stakes are a little different, and they're going to have a lot of pressure on themselves too. But Washington, Montreal doesn't have the same like emotional baggage to it, supercharged emotion that Toronto
that's not personal.
Does. It's not personal. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Yeah, that's
what I should have said in the first place.
And so, yeah, you're right. I think Toronto, Ottawa. I mean, I'm looking for. No, it's true. I mean, and this whole rivalry thing. I mean, going back to the playoff format discussion, I've always said, we from talking, I have a long list of things I think are overrated just in general, like momentum and things like that. But I think rivalries in pro sports are overrated. Like when I think of rivalries, I think of college sports. I think of how personal it is. It doesn't mean there aren't rivalries. Like I like you said, the fan bases with Ottawa and Toronto, I get that part, both in Ontario and obviously Toronto being kind of the New York Yankees of the whole thing, and Ottawa kind of being like the secondary. So I get that stuff. But amongst the players, I mean, in pro sports, I don't think it's as big of a deal. Definitely with Washington and Montreal, it's definitely not a thing in that series. I could see how it is. And the Lightning and Panthers, same type of thing. I could see how it is. But when I look at, all this stuff we talk about and all these things we try to analyze, the minute the puck drops, there's a lot of randomness. And, I'm sure there'll be some skirmishes and some rough housing and stuff early on, like in the Lightning Panthers series or Toronto, Ottawa. But after that, it just becomes hockey. And so when I look like at a matchup, like you were saying, the Lightning and the Panthers, and the Lightning wanting to be at home, that being more important than really who they play or something like that. Tell me what you think of this Lightning team, regardless of who they're playing, now that we've had 82 games. When you look back at the beginning of the season and where your mindset was when you looked at this team and where it is now, are you more impressed, about as impressed as you thought you'd be, less impressed with where they are? Because I'll tell you from my end, I mean, and I'm a fan first. I've always said that I'm a fan first. I haven't let go of the era the Lightning are in. But in the back of my mind, I've been worrying a little bit like, hey, this can't last forever. How long are they going to be one of those teams? And when I say one of those teams, I just mean like a team that's there, a team that's in it, a team that has a shot. And is the window closing? Is the era ending? And I know the overall point total and everything was about the same as last season. But this team, to me, like it felt good. It feels good right now. I don't know what's going to happen in the series. Feeling like, hey, they're still that team. Like these guys are still those guys. And I was impressed with the Lightning this season quite a bit, especially given the changes and worrying that maybe, starting to slip away. And not only did it not, I feel like they're as good as they've been in a while, despite all the success they've already had.
Well, again, like we have talked about this from the start of the year, because I think your sentiment was not the only sentiment. Not so much, I mean, maybe some in the market, but especially like around the league, people who are not focused specifically on the Lightning. They're just looking at the Lightning like, well, they won the 2 cups. They got to the final a third year, but now they've lost in the playoffs in the first round 2 years in a row. Stamkos is not there anymore. Window is closing. And I felt that narrative was false. Not that I knew that the Lightning would have what I'll call a resurgent year, which I think they've had, but because for your window to close, that means that your core players are aging out, basically. And when we look at the core of the Lightning's roster, for the most part, we're talking like late 20s, early 30s. These guys are still in the prime of their career. So I'd never believed that this argument about the window closing was accurate today. I mean, eventually, every team has a window that closes. Like you try and extend it, and Julian Brisebois has been able to extend the window by making some savvy moves to bring in basically NHL ready players who are younger. I mean, whether we're talking about Nick Paul, Brandon Hagel, JJ Moser. I mean, they moved Sergachev's in the prime of his career, but they got younger with JJ Moser. They didn't get older with JJ Moser, right? Geeky as well. He's 20. Yeah. But, Braden Point's still in his 20s. Cooch is going to turn, 32 this summer. Vasilevsky's going to turn 31 this year. I mean, we're not talking 37, 38.
Yeah, still fine.
So as it relates to this year, like we look at last year, what was the problem area for the Lightning last year? Or problem areas? It was primarily keeping the puck out of their own net and keeping the puck out of their own net 5-on-5. They gave up too many goals 5-on-5. So that was going to be an area at the start of the year. If you asked me, what is it going to take for the Lightning to have a better year this year than they had last year? What I would have said was they need to get better defensively. They need to get better defensively, specifically 5-on-5. And that should lead, if they can do it, to basically being better equipped to do damage in the playoffs, because so much of the playoffs is played 5-on-5. You need to be able to defend 5-on-5.
Right.
When they won their cup in 2019, 2020, how many times do we hear John Cooper say, because they had cameras in the room, in the bubble, do not sacrifice defense for offense? We need to take the risk out of our game. Like, he was preaching that, and it was a big part of the message that 2020 Cup team had, and then obviously followed into the next year and the year after. So again, as we've talked about, Bobby, you are a numbers guy. We just went over these numbers the other day, but I'll do them again for you. So last year, defensively, the Lightning finished tied for 22nd in the NHL. That is not good enough. Usually there is a direct correlation between being a top 16 defensive team and getting into the playoffs. This year, in the regular season, of the top 16 defensive teams, we're talking about goals allowed per game, 15 of them made the playoffs. The only team that didn't was 16th, and that was Calgary, and they lost the tiebreaker. They actually had enough points to get in the playoffs. They lost the tiebreaker. The only team that bucked the trend was Montreal. I think one of the reasons Montreal bucked the trend was they had a horrific defensive first half. They got better in the second half. And they got into the playoffs with a fairly low point total, 91. So last year, the Lightning bucked the trend. Tied for 22nd defensively. They were at 3.26. The other number that is notable is the 5-on-5 ratio. 5-on-5 goals for divided by 5-on-5 goals against. So if you're at 1, that means that you're scoring as many 5-on-5 goals as you were allowing. Last year, a year in which the Lightning scored a lot of goals, power play goals, 5-on-5 goals, they were underwater for 5-on-5 ratio, 0.91. They were even worse in terms of their ranking. They were 24th in the NHL. So those are glaring numbers, and I can assure you, Julian Breezeball and his management team were aware of those numbers. So what did they do during the offseason? Well, first of all, they knew they were going to get a healthy Vasilevsky, and how would he perform? And he's performed very well. What did they do?
Yeah, that
they
one
reacquired,
is a big one too.
Yes, that was a big one. They reacquired Ryan McDonagh. He becomes your shutdown defenseman with Eric Chernak. Having McDonagh back has helped Chernak's game. Now Victor Hedman is not seeing the toughest matchups, and Victor is freed from that basically and can do other stuff. They brought in Jake Gensel, who's not only a really good offensive player, he's a great two-way player. On Pittsburgh and Carolina last year, and Pittsburgh missed the playoffs, he finished plus 25. So the real question was, pulling Stamkos off the lineup, out of the lineup, what would it do to the power play? And the power play took a little bit of a hit, but not much of a hit. So defensively this year, look at the Lightning's numbers now that the season is over. They finished 4th in goals allowed per game, 2.63. They're actually 3rd before they lost game 82 to the Rangers. So they just fell below Vegas to 4th. And the 5-on-5 ratio, remember last year they were 24th, 0.91, 3rd, 1.30. So, first of all, I never believed that the window was closing based on the ages of the top guys. McDonagh's 35. I grant you that. Like, eventually, you know, he's gonna slow down, but he hasn't showed it this year. He led the NHL in plus minus, Bobby, plus 43. And the top 4 plus minus guys on the Lightning, McDonagh, Chernak, Cirelli, and Hagel, were the players that saw the toughest matchups during the regular season. So not only were they solid defensively, they contributed. If you're going to finish in the plus 20s, plus 30s, plus 40s, that means you're producing offensively as well. You're on the ice when goals are being scored. So they needed to get better defensively, and they did that. And then you factor in that, you know, many of their main guys are in the late 20s, early 30s range. I mean, I don't think that the window is going to be closing. Now, you get into a playoff series. What do I just say? The top 15 defensive teams are all playoff teams. Florida is one of those teams, right? Florida can defend too. It's going to be a tough matchup. But that's why I said I think that the Lightning are better equipped to handle kind of what they need to handle in the playoffs. But that's how I would look at this year.
Yeah, and having Andre.
Why have they been better this year? They've been better this year because they've kept the puck out of their net more. Why have they kept the puck out of their net more? Personnel, yes. Vasi has had a bounce back year from last year. He was recovering from surgery and missed the first 20 games. But also, if you look at how they've played, they've just allowed fewer scoring chances. They've protected the front of the net much better. They've reduced the number of turnovers that have fueled the opposition attack. They've just played better defensively.
Yeah, no, it's made a huge difference. I mean, that was last season. I remember how frustrating it would be, and you feel like the Lightning had the firepower play with any, and then there'd be a bad chance given up or a bad goal given up, things like that. And this year, I mean, there's still been a few lapses here and there, but overall, I mean, like I said, the numbers are what they are. The Lightning have been a lot. I remember that old feeling you mentioned, like the 2021 and the 2019-2020 teams, when the Lightning got a lead late in those playoff games, if it was 2-1 or if it was 5-4, it didn't matter if it had been a low-scoring game or a high-scoring game. But when they got a lead late, they just absolutely lost. I remember just watching and just that feeling of calm, like, this is fine, like we're cool, like you never worried about any of it. And I don't quite have that feeling yet watching them. We'll see how the playoff games go, but they're certainly a lot more close to that than they were before. And talk about Andrei Vasilevskiy for a minute, because, I mean, we all know, we've seen him. He's been here for years. We've seen everything he's done, and we kind of took him for granted. And I know even when the Lightning did have defensive lapses in the past, and maybe numbers-wise they were giving up more chances than they should have, it didn't feel that way because he made a lot of that stuff just go away. And, yeah, I think, I've never had back surgery before. I've had back issues. A lot of people maybe know or don't know, but we take it for granted. Like, he came back and it's okay, he's back. That's it. But there's a huge difference between literally being physically capable of playing and being back. And yeah, now looking back at last season, you can tell he was physically capable of playing, but he wasn't back like it feels like he is now.
It's hard to miss 20 games. I actually was wondering last year, like, would it affect a goalie less than a non-goalie? Because the non-goalie is moving, like the goalie is basically stopping the puck, whereas the other players are reacting to what's around them. Yeah. They're moving all over the ice. Well, they talk about game shape, right? And what we heard in advance of Vasilevsky's return last year was that, yeah, it does affect the goalie, like timing and understanding like how to find the puck, working through traffic around you, having that game feel. Brian Engblom has described it this way: when you miss training camp or you miss a significant amount of time and you're rejoining your team that has been playing, it's like jumping in the washing machine on spin. And I think we have to acknowledge that there was a little bit of that last year for Vasilevskiy. I actually liked his last third of the season last year. It felt like the last third of the season for him, the last third of his season,
he got better,
was his best part of the season. And he actually played pretty well in the playoffs. I mean, the Lightning lost in 5, but, the games that they lost were close, at least going into the third period. They were either tied or down by a goal going into the third in the 4 games that they lost. And then the Panthers, talking about defending well, I mean, the Panthers just clamped down in the third period in those games and closed it out. But, the Lightning didn't lose that series because they got subpar goaltending from Vasilevskiy. So he's carried that into this year. He has played very well. He's going to be a Vezina finalist. I think Connor Hellebuck is going to win the Vezina, deservedly so. I mean, he's had a record, almost like record-setting year based on what we've seen from goaltenders in this era, where
he could be the overall MVP, up. Really.
And yeah, there's some chatter about that. But, Vasi's going to be a finalist. I mean, he's basically second in all the significant categories. If you factor in games played, where you're talking about guys who have played at least half the season, he's right there, second or third in just about every big category. So he's had a terrific year, but I think part of the reason, I mean, he's done a good job, but he would probably tell you as well that the Lightning have made his workload more manageable because they have cut down on scoring chances against. And that's a credit to how they played this year. And you're right. Like, there have been games where they've given up chances. There have been games where they haven't been good defensively. But, you're not going to have a perfect slate for 82. Hockey is a fast-paced game. You're going to have mistakes made. But the Lightning have had fewer mistakes throughout the year. They played more consistent hockey in terms of cutting down on those mistakes than they had last year.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that's going to need to be that way against this Panthers team, because it feels like so. You said, first of all, there's going to be a lot more 5-on-5. Second of all, this is just a team in general where, like, goals are at a premium these games. There's certain games you get down 1-0 or 2-0 and you're like, it's no big deal. We're fine. This isn't going to be a series like that. It's going to feel like overtime almost when the game starts. Like whoever can get that first goal is going to be at such an advantage, and it's going to be so hard to string multiple goals together in short amounts of time. Let me ask you about this Panthers. Kind of the same thing I just asked you about the Lightning, now about the Panthers, where they were a year ago, obviously the defending Stanley Cup champions. This season, at least in the regular season, wasn't quite the same. They weren't the same team. Things, especially on the offensive end, they didn't quite have the production. Have been dealing with a lot of injuries, especially in the second half. And, I know Barkov missed some time. I know Ekblad, he had the PED thing, which you almost never hear about in hockey, but he's going to miss the first 2 games of the series. Tkachuk hadn't played since the Four Nations tournament. Paul Maurice has said they expect to have everybody besides Ekblad back for game 1, and then he'll be back in game 3. But what do you feel like this Panthers team is now compared to the one the Lightning saw last season when they were on their way to winning the Stanley Cup?
Well, it's funny. We started the show playing that clip of John Cooper talking about, a team from Florida has represented the East for 5 years in a row. And I think they're actually, maybe I shouldn't use the word similarities, but we can see from the Panthers this year some of the things that we saw from the Lightning after they won the first cup of the 2 in a row and then 3 trips to the finals in 2020. The Lightning did not have a particularly noteworthy 2021 regular season. They got up to that was the 56 game season. They got up to a really good start. I think they were 8-1-1 after 10 games. And they kind of got a secure spot, and they were kind of humdrumming their way through the final 46. And if you recall, Bobby, they finished 3rd in the division. They didn't win the division. They didn't even get home ice in the first round. And they were okay with that. And then they entered the playoffs, and I actually felt like they were vulnerable in that first round series against the Panthers. They ended up winning it in 6, but the early games, neither team was really defending very well. And the Lightning got better as the series progressed, and once they won that series, they really kicked it into high gear, and they found their playoff mojo, basically, and they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. The next year, 21-22, that was a weird year because, to your point, like meaningful versus meaningless regular season games, the top 8 in the East had such a big lead over the bottom 8 that really was about seeding for the second half of the year. But again, it wasn't like the Lightning had a particularly inspired regular season. But you get into the playoffs, they survive a first-round series against Toronto, and again, it helped them get their game in gear. And they were really, really good through the middle 2 rounds, and then they kind of ran out of gas, and they had injury problems, and they ran into a juggernaut in Colorado in the Stanley Cup final. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, for Florida, it's not just that they won the Cup last year. They went to the final the year before. They've had 2 deep playoff runs. When you have 2 deep playoff runs, and then you win the Cup, how dialed in are you going to be for Game 12 of the regular season? It's just different, right? They know where they want to get. They want to make sure they do enough to get into the playoffs. And they're like, show us where we need to show up. Tell us where we need to show up for game 1. We'll be there. Home, road, doesn't matter. They kind of have that attitude the Lightning had a couple of years ago, where it was like, it doesn't matter where the game is played. We're good. We're going to be ready to go. But this regular season has been a slog. And I think that's the right word to describe a couple of those regular seasons the Lightning had. You're losing players off your Cup team, and they did. They lost Brandon Montour. They lost their whole 4th line. They lost Oliver Ekman-Larsson. These were important players on their team last year. They've had to kind of adjust and try and find other guys. They've had some poor play over stretches. They've had losing streaks. Last year they were number 1 in the league with Winnipeg in goals allowed per game. Remember, I said the Lightning were tied for 22nd. Florida was tied for 1st. They've been not as good defensively this year, even though they are a top 10 team. I think they finished 7th in team defense. Bobrovsky's not had the same year that he had last year. So their team hasn't played as well during the regular season. Some of that is due to, I think, the elements you talked about. They've had injuries, Ekblad suspended, et cetera, et cetera. Some of it is just the grind of the regular season, and they understand where they want to get.
Hard to do it over and over again, man.
That's what I mean. Yeah, and they've had short off seasons. The Lightning experienced that too. But I think they're going to be ready in the playoffs, and I'll repeat what I said at the top of the show. Like, it is no small feat to knock off the champs. I mean, as depleted as the Lightning were by injuries in the 22 final, and they were. I mean, Braden Point played the first 2 games, but he wasn't himself, and he pulled himself. He didn't play after that. Cirelli was playing on one arm in the last couple of games of that series. And Colorado they were rolling. What did it take for the Avs to knock off the Lightning? They needed 2 overtime wins. They needed to come from behind in Game 6. They had to come from behind in Game 4. They were very close games. It's not like they won. I mean, they won the one game 8-0. But, when the series got going, we got deeper into the playoffs. These are all like really tight one-goal games.
Close series.
So I think, and so like the Lightning had the championship pedigree. The Panthers have that. That's why it's going to be tough, I think, to whoever, whether it's the Lightning in the first round or if the Panthers win the series in subsequent rounds. But I think that they are more vulnerable this year than they were last year, just based on what's been going on. They're not as deep of a team. They're still a really, really good team, and they could win the cup this year. But we see this. This is what happens. You win the cup, players move on. You can't keep everybody. Brandon Montour signed a big contract in Seattle, right? So they're going to have to figure out a way to make do with some different players. I think Bill Zito's done a really good job of trying to account for the departures. They brought in Seth Jones. Nico Sturm's a really good addition. He was on that Colorado team that beat the Lightning in 22. Really good fourth-line center, great on faceoffs. They had Kevin Stenlund last year. He was a big part of their team. He had that role, fourth-line center, penalty killer, good on faceoffs. They got production from their fourth line last year in the playoffs. So that's my analysis of Florida. I think that they're going to be ready, but they're not the same team that they were last year. And what we saw from the Lightning was, after kind of a punch the clock regular season to make sure you get in the playoffs, it took the Lightning a little time in that first round to get the engine revved. It wasn't the light switch. I mean, you're trying to hit the light switch, but at least based on what I saw from the Lightning in the 2021 first round against Florida and the 2022 first round against Toronto.
Yeah, and I've said this before on other shows I've done. And we're about the same age, I think. So, I don't know, did you grow up playing Nintendo, like the actual gray and black Nintendo?
I was Atari. I got a little more gray than you, Bobby.
Oh, so you're a little.
Yeah, I grew up in the 70s.
But still, you get we're close in age. You're like a big brother thing. But anyway, so when I was a kid, I had the Nintendo, like the original Nintendo, and one of my favorite games was Tecmo Super Bowl, which you've probably heard of. And so on Tecmo Super Bowl, I got good enough at it, as most kids did. I would win the Super Bowl. So then, and this is with the Bucks. I was with like the.
Did you give yourself
Bucks
a parade or?
Yeah, well, at first, this is my point. At first, it was like, yeah, man, I won the Super Bowl on Super Tecmo Bowl. I did it with the worst team because the Bucks. It was based on the actual real life teams, and the Bucks were horrible in 1991. And I would never ever be anybody but the Bucks. Like I refused. I wasn't one of those kids that picked the best team. But anyway, I digress. So after I won the Super Bowl a few times, and you did the exact same, you did the regular season, the playoffs, I got bored, and I said, now I want to go 19-0. I'm going 19-0, man. And so I started trying to do that. And I'd maybe go 11-12-0, and I'd always lose a game somewhere. I never could go 19-0. So what do you think I did when I lost that regular season game somewhere along the way? I just hit the reset button. I'm like, I'm not doing the rest. I already won the Super Bowl 3 times. Now I'm just going to start over until I keep accomplishing my goal. That's all I cared about. You can't do that in real life. In real, like the Panthers or the Lightning, you got to go start over. You got to go through all training camp. You got to go through all preseason. You got to play 82 games for 6 months. You can't just say, boom, let's go. I want to start all over right now. And like you said, hey, tell us where to play. Game 1, don't worry about what we did in the regular season. Don't worry if it didn't look as good as before. Game 1, we'll be ready to go. Just tell us when and where. We got this. We know what to do. That's exactly what it is. That's a great point. Except they couldn't actually just take the controller and throw it against the wall and hit the reset button like I used to do when I was 12 years old. You got to actually go do all those things all over again. Yeah. And it's in real life, it's a lot tougher because in the video game, I would just start over. But I actually caught myself thinking, oh, man, hey, they've been to 2 straight Cup finals. That means they've had 2 straight short off seasons. They're going to be really, really tired, right? And then I thought, oh, wait, the Lightning had 2 straight Cup wins and 2 straight off seasons, and they still went to the Cup final again the third time. I was like, never mind, scratch that. The Panthers are still going to be pretty tough to play against here coming up in the first round. And yet there is an element to that because, if you have to go through all those things and they do it without the same people you did it with, it's a lot tougher.
You can't predict injuries, too. And I mean, I'm trying to remember last year if the Panthers had any significant injuries. I don't think that they did.
They were pretty okay.
Panther fans. I mean, generally, if you go
now,
deep,
they're not.
Either you have injuries to key players that don't keep them out very long, or the significant injuries are not to your key players, right? And so it's one or the other. Remember, 2023, Eric Chernak, they lose him early in that series on the bunting elbow. I mean, that was a significant loss. And, I mean, you can't predict that. Is that wear and tear? I mean, it wasn't wear and tear that Bunting decided to elbow Chernak in the face, right? But I think there is the element of wear and tear where you do have a shorter offseason, you have less time to recover. And unlike you, Bobby, where you would be like, all right, it's September, I'm going to just do away with the regular season. I'm going straight to the Super Bowl and playing. That's not only is it not real life, that's hard to do because you're putting your body through the toughest hockey. It's hard to come back the next year. It's especially hard to come back after 3 months and just dive right into a basically playoff intensity. So you need that time to build up your game, I think. And keep sharp, but also not stress your body immediately the way that you're going to in a playoff series, if that's, what it's going to take, which is what it's going to take to win a Stanley Cup. So this is by no means me saying the Panthers are not going to win this series. The Panthers very well could win the series. I think that they are going to really hang their hat on this back-to-back thing, which the Lightning did. And make no mistake, they know they want to be right there with the Lightning and do the back-to-back. They're going to be extremely motivated.
Do what the Lightning already did. Yeah.
Yes, they want to be mentioned with the Lightning as another team that went back-to-back, which is very hard to do, and go to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. But there's a reason why teams generally don't go to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. It's very, very difficult to go through 3 long runs like that. Based on everything we talked about, attrition, injuries, short off season, other teams, maybe it's their time. So we'll see. I maintain that the Lightning can beat the Panthers, but to beat the Panthers, the Lightning are going to have to play at an extremely high level. They're not going to get any freebies. This isn't going to be like, proceed directly to collect your $200, right? You're jumping around the Monopoly board. Lightning have to earn every win, every step of the way is going to be hard fought against this opponent. This opponent is not going to self-destruct. The Lightning are going to simply have to outplay them. But I think they're capable of doing it.
Getting a freebie. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's different. I mean, I think of 2004, and again, this partially, I guess, is the format. I think of 2004, the first Lightning Cup run, and it was how you kind of envision it. I remember thinking, the Islanders weren't any good, but for those fans that remember that far back, I have that first round Islanders, no big deal. We'll take care of this, and they did it in 5. Even the second round against Montreal was no big deal. Then the East final against Philly and the Cup final, that's where it got serious. It's not like that anymore. It almost feels inverted in some ways where you feel like if you can just get through the first couple rounds, then you might have a real chance. It's flipped.
Yeah. I mean, I will point out, I remember that Islanders series. The Islanders had a couple of games late in the regular season against the Lightning, one in each building. They won both. So I remember coming into that series, the Islanders had their chests puffed out a little bit because the Lightning were the number 1 seed because they won the East. And the Islanders were like, we got this. And then they won game 2 at Tampa. And then the Lightning went up there and shut them out in games 3 and 4 and really established control. The Montreal series in the second round, I think that was a function of Montreal was the 7th seed and rallied from 3-1 down to beat Boston in an upset another big rivalry series, right? Montreal-Boston. They won games 5 and 7 in Boston to rally and win that series. And it was almost like they exhaled a little bit, and the Lightning jumped on them and went up 2-0, and then they won in dramatic fashion in Montreal in Game 3, which I'm sure you remember. LeCavalier scores 6 attacker goal between his legs, and Richard scores in overtime. They snatched. I mean, Montreal played well enough to win Game 3, and then at 2-1, who knows? Maybe you got a series. It was 3-0 at that point. I will point out, like you mentioned, all right, things got real against Calgary. Calgary was the lower seed in all of the rounds. They knocked off 3 division
7, right?
winners.
I think, or 6.
Yeah. Getting to the final, they knocked off the 3 division winners. So if you had seen Calgary in the first round, you might not have been saying, boy, this is a team that's a game away from winning the Stanley Cup. But by the time they got to the final, yes, everyone was taking them seriously. So even then, like, there's some drama and there's some intrigue. It's not like the mid-'80s when Gretzky and the Oilers were seeing the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. I mean, they were just so much better, and they'd win 3 games by a combined like 24-5 or something like that. It's different. It's been different, but it's especially different now. I'm not sure that there are going to be some teams that are favored in the first round. I think Washington will be favored to beat Montreal by favored odds makers, yes, but the prognosticators will probably all pick Washington. Most people will pick Toronto to beat Ottawa. Most people will pick Winnipeg to beat St. Louis, but it doesn't mean that it's going to happen for sure. I think all the lower seeds have an opportunity to win just based on the parity in the league. Also, the 1 seeds, maybe other than Vegas, they all have question marks going into this playoff year. Winnipeg and Washington have to show me. I think both those teams have to answer those questions. Washington because they haven't been there, and Winnipeg because they've gone out early in a lot of years. And then Toronto, of course, is going to have is this the year question. Vegas is a little different. Yeah, they won their cup. They had their attrition, right? Like they lost some guys after they won the cup. They squeaked into the playoffs and lost in the first round. They had more attrition. Now they've revamped their team, and they're a division winner again. I think people will look at them as a very solid team.
They've literally never had a bad season. Vegas is so weird. Like they win the cup final, and they win the cup. They're always the number one. It's like, wait, you've been around 5 minutes, and I mean, obviously it's different now than it was when the Lightning were an expansion team. But yeah, like, those fans have no concept of anything. But well,
they missed the playoffs. They missed the playoffs 1 year.
Whatever.
1 year they missed the playoffs before they won the cup.
And they weren't even that bad then.
They weren't bad.
No. But yeah, you're right. And you look at all the teams. And listen, we spent all this time doing all this analysis and doing all these shows, and we've seen it over and over again. I mean, especially NHL, even all sports, but the NHL playoffs especially, every team has a chance. You have no idea what's going to happen. Weren't the St. Louis Blues, remember a few years ago before the Lightning started their run, and they were dead, not playoffs, they were dead last in the entire 32-team league, with 2 months to go in the regular season. They win the Stanley Cup. So none of this matter. I mean, they could get out there in the millisecond the puck drops, it's all out the window. But are you, besides the Lightning Panthers series, is there any first-round series? I know you don't have a chance and you got to travel and all the things you do, but are you looking forward to watching any other specific series besides the Lightning Panthers in these playoffs?
I think the Dallas-Colorado series has a lot of intrigue to it. They're both really good teams. Colorado, I'm not usually a big believer that adding 6-7 guys at or around the deadline is always the best move because you're really changing the chemistry in your locker room. But Colorado, I don't know how many players they actually added. They added a lot. But I think their GM looked at their team and made a determination that we're good at the top. The McKinnons, Makar, Lehkonen, and then, of course, there was the Rantanen move that came before the deadline. But they got a good player back in Marty Necas. But they made a lot of moves, and they made some significant moves at the deadline. And it seems to have worked. They've had a very, very good second half. And they made a goalie switch, too. They added Mackenzie Blackwood fairly early in the year. So they made some significant decisions and significant changes, unlike the Rangers, who tried to do the same thing for maybe some different reasons, and the Rangers just had a horrific year. So I think Colorado is dangerous. Dallas has been one of the top teams for the last several years, and they are an excellent, well-rounded, well-coached team. A very, very good goalie in Ottinger, who doesn't get maybe the same amount of attention as the Vasilevskis and Shesterkins and Hellebucks, but he's right up there with them, and he's one of these guys that, you know, will play 3 out of every 4 for his team and play very, very well. So I think you have 2 good teams. You also have the Rantanen factor, which is very intriguing. He's taking on his former team. And the Stars are now going to be without Jason Robertson for the first round. He got injured in game 82. Talking about injuries. I mean, when you lose a player that late in the regular season, a key player, that is tough.
That's tough.
So that is a coin toss series to me.
When you
I mean,
know
I may be proven wrong, but sorry.
No, I think you're right. I mean, no, and just like the East, you mentioned all 3 other series have like a clear favorite. The Lightning Panthers is a total coin flip, and at least according to the odds makers, and it's the same with that one in the West, where I think there's a favorite, and the other ones that, you know, at least a little bit, where that one, tough matchups in the first round, man. It's tough. It's the way that's the way the format is, for better or worse. And so, what do you think of the schedule? Because I mean, we were talking a little bit, you know, unofficially last week. Looks like it's going to be Sunday, game 1. We don't know for sure. That's what we're hearing. And then the Lightning and Panthers get pushed to the last. I mean, they're a series, Dave, that will have played 2 full games before the Lightning and Panthers drop the puck for game 1 at 8:30. I know TV controls all this stuff, but there'll be teams that series that it's 2 games in, and the Lightning and Panthers haven't played yet as of Tuesday night.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things were at play here. First of all, the NHL, I think it was smart that they did this. They had the regular season end in the middle of a week, so they could start the playoffs on the weekend. Last year, I think the regular season, I'd have to go back and look, but I think it ended at a time where the playoffs didn't start on the weekend. And I remember the Lightning played game 4 against the Panthers it was at home. I think they played on a Sunday afternoon because I had a book signing. I remember I had a book signing before game 4, and it was an afternoon game. So that probably meant the series started like on Monday, maybe. And I think the Lightning and Panthers were like a lot of series. So we missed a weekend. So this year, the regular season ended on a Thursday, but the way the league did it, the Western Conference was done on Wednesday. There was one Western Conference game on Thursday, Calgary and LA. The only reason that game was played is that was a postponed game for when LA had the fires, whenever it was in January. So that game got pushed. So they always, I think, had an idea that they would start that weekend, and they'd probably start that weekend on Saturday with the West, because the West would have had a couple of days. A lot of teams in the East did play Thursday, including the Lightning, and probably the idea was to have those series start on Sunday, which is why I think the Lightning were expecting that they would start on Sunday. The Lightning, and at least I can tell you what Rob Zettler told me, I did an interview with him after the first period of game 82, and at that point the schedule had come out, and I asked him about this Tuesday start time. And he said, we were not really overly excited about playing on Saturday or Sunday, because we finished on the road on a Thursday night, and the Lightning got home around 2 a.m. Friday morning. And he's like, we were not crazy about having to start over the weekend. So they actually looked at it as a positive. I mean, I don't know that they would have had a problem starting Monday. Monday might have been fine, but as it turns out, they got pushed to Tuesday. So in this window, game Thursday, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 2 full off days, 2 full practice days. Today is Saturday. We're pre-taping before noon, Bobby, but the team is going to be taking the ice here for the first of those practices in a little bit. So from the coach's standpoint, they really, I think, like having the extra time. You have some guys who are banged up. Chafee took the hit to the head from Puljujärvi. Hopefully he will use this extra time to recover. Same with Luke Glendening, who had been skating in a couple of days before the end of the regular season. We'll see what his status looks like. Bjorkstrand's out week to week, so I wouldn't think that the extra couple of days will matter for him. So they get a little extra time to rest. They get a little extra time to practice, and maybe that will benefit them. On the 8:30 start, that is due to the fact that ESPN is a doubleheader, and Carolina and New Jersey play at 6. Yeah. So the Lightning and Panthers could have been the 6 o'clock game. They weren't. So it's going to be a late night for Lightning fans and Panther fans.
I have no problem. I mean, I'm the late night guy, and I got kids who I got a million things, and their little league practices, and I know a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, an 8:30 start." I actually have a chance to be set to go, and I'll be there on Tuesday night. But like, I can actually get some things done with the family beforehand. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you play them all at 8:30. I know a lot of people, especially if it goes to overtime or something like that, don't like that. But I think it'll be fun, and I know, of course, we've got our FanDuel Sun broadcast with Dave Randorf and Brian England. The first round still goes on local TV, so I always like to watch that broadcast. But it's cool to know you're on national TV as well, and they want to televise all the playoff games in their own window. So I get it. I'm cool with it, and it should be a lot of fun on Tuesday night. I wanted to ask you one other thing. As you're talking about, you mentioned Gretzky a little while ago, and you mentioned that we were talking about the Caps and the Canadian series. Did you feel like I felt like the Ovechkin breaking Gretzky's record was a way bigger deal than it got made out to be? Like, I thought that would be something that dominated. And this is one of the most, first of all, dominant players in the history of any sport, not just hockey. And one of the most hallowed records, like the most basic unit of success is scoring a goal. And what seemed like one of the most unattainable records to break. And I felt like outside of like the narrow hockey world, I didn't feel like nearly a big enough deal was made out of Ovechkin literally breaking that record and trying to get it under the wire before having to wait a whole offseason and the mad push. Like, I felt like it wasn't talked about that much.
Well, you probably dabble in those waters more than me, because I am in the hockey circles, and I know it got a lot of attention from the league. And I mean, I was seeing the ticket prices for that Islander game where he broke it when he didn't break it the game before at home. So I think it got a lot of attention. I mean, Gretzky was traveling first to Washington, then to Long Island to be there, which I thought was a very nice gesture on his part. He was going to stay with the Capitals as long as it took. So, look, it is a very, very big deal. And congratulations to Ovechkin, who has done it and did it for a couple of reasons. First of all, he has remained incredibly productive throughout his career. And also, for the most part, he avoided serious injury. This year, when he hurt his leg, missed, 20 games? It's really the first significant injury he's ever had. I mean, you look at his year by year, I mean, maybe a couple of games here and there, but most seasons he's at like 80, 81, 82 games played. So he has been durable, given his style of play was not a given. He's a big, strong man who plays a physical game, has played a physical game throughout his career, but he has remained healthy. So he's been able to stay productive, and he has been productive. So that's what it takes, right? 20 years of 45 goals on average. So that's no small feat. So congratulations to Ovechkin. I will point out that Auston Matthews just got to 400 right at the end of the regular season. And, certainly he's in the prime of his career. So now the questions are going to start like, well, first of all, where is Ovi going to finish? Because he didn't stop at 895. Like, I think he scored a couple of goals after that. So what's his final number? Yeah, what's his final number going to be? And then Matthews is the next guy. So if Matthews is going to make a run at this, same thing holds. He's got to stay healthy, and he's got to stay productive. Matthews has been a little different than Ovechkin, who's pretty much consistently like 42 goals, 48 goals, 54 goals, 47 goals. Matthews is like 60 goals, 35 goals, 69 goals, 37 goals. So, yeah. I mean, it's averaging out the same, but he's had a couple of monster goal-scoring years. And then on the next year, he's kind of been in the 30s. I'm not sure if he got to 40 this year, but when we saw him at the end of the regular season, he was still in the 30s. And last year, of course, he was one shy of 70, and Matt Tompkins stopped him in game 82 in that game at Amalie. So he finished with 69. So I think it's an intriguing storyline to kind of keep in the back of your head, but an amazing accomplishment for Ovechkin. And I always point this out, Bobby. So Gretzky got to 894 in 20 years. You know, he came in as an 18-year-old with Edmonton, even though he played in the WHA before that as an even younger player, which was pro hockey. Wayne Gretzky finished his career with more assists than anyone in the NHL has points. So when you consider...
if you took away all of his goals, he'd still lead in points.
If you just gave him assists, he would still be number one in the NHL in points in history. So this incredible accomplishment, and it was an incredible accomplishment for Ovechkin to overtake Gretzky in goals. That is in some ways like one of the less impressive statistical categories for Gretzky. And he was asked the question, I think Rick Bowness actually asked him the question about, like, you know, when Gretzky played, teams weren't defending as well. Goalies weren't wearing the same gear. There was more net to shoot at. It was more of a high scoring era, the 80s, when Gretzky was doing a lot of his damage. And he's like, yeah, that's a fair point, Rick. But you know what? I would have loved to have played in 3-on-3 overtime. Said I would have loved to have started the power play in the offensive zone. You know, I would have loved to have had the equipment with the sticks to shoot the puck that we didn't have. So it's probably like this in many sports that, you know, different eras have different advantages and disadvantages, and you just have to accept the numbers for where they are. And keep in mind, there were a lot of really, really good players playing when Gretzky was playing, and none of them approached him in terms of what he was doing as far as his point production.
Yeah, to me, when you're comparing anything, whether it's a record, whether there's any accomplishment whatsoever through generations, which is impossible to do accurately, I always come back to one question: how much further ahead of his peers was this person compared to that person? And like you said, you can talk about sticks, you can talk about goalie pads being narrow, whatever it is. But yeah, no one, even now with the record being broken, has ever been further ahead of their peers at any given time in their sport than Wayne Gretzky was when he played. And maybe Tiger Woods in that early 2000s run is up there. But that's what it comes down to for me. But either way, like, I felt like the only reason I asked you the question, I felt like when Aaron Judge was like breaking not even the real home run record, like just the old home run record, that got way more attention than, again, in national circles, not just in hockey, it definitely got a lot of attention, but it felt like there was, you know, I was thinking, this is a really big deal. This doesn't feel like it's getting covered like a big enough deal, but certainly either way, playoff goals are their own separate thing, and we're about to start the playoffs, and here we go. And I'll tell you what, Dave, I know you do too, because you broadcast every second of Lightning hockey. You're there, and you travel, the grind, all the things that the players do. You know, you're doing it too. I mean, not playing the game, but you're up there on the planes and in the hotels and everything else. And it's a long, long time. And then what I always like about this time of year is it just kind of hits you in the face so quickly, because the desperation begins immediately. Like, you go through all these games watching, oh, we gave up a goal, no big deal. Oh, we lost, no big deal. We'll get them tomorrow. And now all of a sudden, within 1 minute of the game starting on Tuesday night, I'm going to be freaking out every time the opposing team enters our offensive zone. I mean, that's what I love about it. Like, it immediately, from 6 months of just kind of, okay, next one. And now it feels like every single trip down the ice, it's on the line. And I know as a fan, I love that. As a broadcaster, you must love that.
Well, it's nerve-wracking, which is why the Stanley Cup playoffs are so great. You know, the intensity is sky high, and your emotions, you know, runs the gamut. And when, you know, the team that you're following loses, it feels like it's the end of the line. And when the team wins, you know, the feeling is they're never going to lose again. Right? Everything's just magnified in the playoffs. But I think that's what makes it such a fun ride. So hopefully it's a long ride this year for the Lightning. But the beauty of sports, we can't script this, right? It's completely unpredictable. And, you know, it'll start on Tuesday, and we'll see how the Lightning do. What is predictable, though, is the Lightning, as I'm repeating myself here, the Lightning are going to have to play at a high level to have a chance to win the series. And by high level, I'm talking about really minding their defensive business and making sure they are not giving any freebies to the other team.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, any lapse could be the one that costs you a game, and any game could be the one that costs you a series. And if anything goes to overtime, heaven forbid we get through all that. But, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it, looking forward to hearing your voice, looking forward to everything that comes along with playoff hockey, which I always say we've gotten used to. If you're a Lightning fan, especially if you're a little bit younger, and we take it for granted, sure, the playoffs. But I grew up in the era when not just the Lightning, the Bucks. No, my teams didn't even make the playoff. My first playoff experience, I was 17 years old. And so I don't care if the Lightning win 20 Stanley Cups, and I don't care if they make the playoffs 50 years in a row. I will never take for granted when you get to the playoffs and when you start that first series, because I remember what it was like when it wasn't even an option. Like, we're just going to play the regular season and watch other teams have all the fun. Here we are. So tell us what's going to be the schedule here. I know with Lightning Power Lunch, you and Greg will be back during the week. It's been a pleasure for me to be here. What can people expect here on Lightning Power Lunch as we go through the playoffs?
Well, in the playoffs, we're doing weekends. So today is Saturday. We'll have a show tomorrow. I don't know who's going to be on the other side with me. That's a Steve Versnick decision. I hope that we get to do this again. And then Monday, Greg will be back, our usual time slot. And then, all right, KJ Retro will be on with me tomorrow for the Sunday show. And then Greg and I will have Monday show, Tuesday show, and then a late start. Tuesday night, 8:30 face-off, game 1.
Should be a lot of fun. If you got to get some rest on Monday or get a nap early in the day, if you have a chance on your lunch hour, maybe go out to your car, recline in the seat, something, whatever you got to do, come ready to play, 8:30, just like you expect the Lightning to come ready to play for the later start. And until then, Dave, it has been a pleasure. I hope we get to do it again during these playoffs, but absolutely a blast to be able to come on the air with you and do the show today. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Bobby.